Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Mintz, and I am the Executive Director of the Indianapolis Jewish Community Relations Council, which is the Jewish community's public policy, intergroup, and interfaith relations arm in central Indiana on behalf of the Jewish community. We are a constituent agency of the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis, and it's my honor to open today's program. First, want to acknowledge that we are recording today's session, so we will pull it together and then post either on our YouTube or Facebook or some sort of social media that way. So for anybody not able to join us today or interested in revisiting the words of wisdom that are going to come from this impressive panel of experts, you'll be able to do so. So on behalf of the Jewish Community Relations Council, I'm delighted to open our third JCRC Talks. This is a program that we launched a couple months ago as we recognized that the world of COVID and the pandemic was not only forcing us all to engage virtually, we needed to continue to be able to build relationships and learn from colleagues and leaders and be in some sort of shared space, even if virtually, but that the pandemic itself was exacerbating so many issues that the Jewish community cares about and that so many of our coalition partners care about, and at a time when needs were already great, they were becoming even greater. So our first JCRC Talks addressed health disparities, particularly experienced in the African American community, and our second session addressed voter access, and that was just right before the primary. So we are delighted to be back, and we knew that we wanted to have this conversation with our only a few. There are many others, but we knew we wanted to have these organizations represented in a conversation around philanthropy today and how the role of philanthropy and philanthropists may be changing and affected. So my job at this point is to say welcome and to introduce our moderator. And I am so delighted that Marcy Price is going to be moderating today's conversation. Marcy is currently the Director for Social and Emotional Learning at ACT. She has her master's in nonprofit management from IU and has been in the fund development grant management world for over 2 decades. And currently she's an active volunteer with Indiana United Ways and is serving on the board of Crane House, the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis, and the Jewish Community Relations Council. So as we pulled this panel together, I thought there is no one better in our community, and it's as much an opportunity to lift you up a little bit, Marcy, and let the viewers know that we have this gem within our community who is stepping into and actively engaged in organizations outside the Jewish community as well as inside, which is something that JCRC really appreciates and values. So the back end, the staff that's working the back end of this webinar is going to take me down, and we are going to learn from Marcy and our panelists.
Well, thank you so much. That's such a great introduction, Lindsay. And I'm so excited to be here with such a phenomenal group of women and to hear more about your experiences right now. First off, I'd love to just give some brief introductions of each of you before we start the panel. First, I'd like to introduce Pamela Ross, who is Central Indiana Community Foundation's first Vice President of Opportunity, Equity, and Inclusion. She leads the organization's internal process of ensuring equitable policies and practices, making sure they're operationalized and exemplified in all the work of the foundation. She's also responsible for CICF's organizational initiatives that support equity, inclusive economic growth, and racial awareness in Central Indiana. She serves on the board of Kennedy King Memorial Initiative and other various committees focusing on disparities in multiple sectors. So we're thrilled to have you here, Pamela. Thank you for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce Debbie Barton-Grant. She came to Indianapolis in September 2013 after serving in Jewish communities in Palm Beach County, Detroit, Chicago, and South Bend. I should also say that she is the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Federation, for those that don't know. She received her BA from Indiana University, her MSW and certificate in Jewish communal service. She loves traveling. She could plan an entire vacation around movies. She's a friend of mine. She's married to Scott and has 3 boys. I'm excited to have you as part of this panel. Welcome, Debbie. And then Tiara Dungy. Welcome. She's a doctoral student and lecturer at the IU Family School of Philanthropy, teaching undergraduate courses on philanthropic studies, professional development courses in fundraising, campus-wide workshops on implicit bias. Prior to entering the doctoral program, her career rotated between the philanthropic and private sectors in the US and in South Africa, including corporate social responsibility at Comcast Corporation and community outreach for the US Fund for UNICEF. She's an active member of several advisory boards, employing training in diversity, equity, and inclusion to support impactful social research and institutional change, including the great work that United Way is doing in ALICE populations. So thank you, Tiara. It's thrilled to have you here. There's so many impressive things to talk about you, to say about you. And then finally, Sarah Van Slambrook, last but certainly not least. The Chief Impact Officer at United Way of Central Indiana. As a member of the executive team, she's responsible for evolving and executing impact initiatives that are designed to move struggling families towards self-sufficiency, support the basic needs of the community's most vulnerable individuals, and spur innovation in social services. Most recently, she's led the administration of the COVID-19 Community Economic Relief Fund to bring more than $23 million in grants to 200 organizations serving people impacted by COVID in a little more than 100 days in the midst of the pandemic. That's insane. That's so impressive. She has 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector and is a steering committee member of Great Places 2020, an advisory board member for Faith in Action Project and for the Indiana Nonprofits Project. So wow, this is so impressive. Thank you so much for joining me in what I'm sure will be a fascinating conversation. So I'd love to kick off this panel and I'll call on whoever to go first. But it would be great if each of you could just give a brief overview of your organization and the kinds of work that you're doing right now. And then if you could just begin by answering this specific question. But as leaders in the philanthropic sector, each of your organizations play a huge role in meeting the systemic needs of our community. How have recent events, which I feel like I don't even need to name, but I will, such as, you know, COVID-19 and issues of racial justice and social unrest, impacted the work of your organizations, and how have you needed to pivot in light of these events? So if I could start with you, Debbie, that would be great, if you'd be willing to kick us off.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Marcy. Thank you, and thank you for lovely introduction. And to my colleagues on the panel, thank you for taking the time to do this for JCRC as well. So I'm Debbie Grant. I'm the Federation CEO, as Marcy said, the Jewish Federation CEO. Jewish Federation, just to give you a little Federation 101 very quickly, and cut me off, Marcy, if I start rambling, we're part of a national organization. There are 154 Jewish federations across North America. In Indianapolis, we've been around since 1904. And actually, if you look at the original charter for United Way, the model of United Way was based on the federation system model of raising dollars collectively and then allocating those dollars out where they are needed most at any given time. So Indianapolis has a long and developed relationship of philanthropy for the Jewish community here in Indianapolis, but also for the community in which we live, the community that is our neighborhood, and we take that very, very seriously. The Federation is the central umbrella fundraising organization, and then we have partner organizations that over the years, as needs arose, we created in order to meet a need in the community. So the Jewish Community Center, Hooverwood, our nursing home and assisted living, JCRC, which is our outward facing organization and advocacy organization, Jewish Family Service, which is our social service organization, and the Academy, the Hasting Hebrew Academy is our day school. We also do engagement and education as a part of the Federation. It used to be a separate agency, but shared services has changed that in recent years. And you know, to answer your question directly, Marcy, my staff makes fun of me because I keep using the word pivot, but we've been pivoting now for 6 months at every single moment. When we closed our offices and the city, you know, kind of shut itself down at the beginning of this 6 months ago, we immediately sprung to action as a staff and as a board on how we could continue to engage our community, how we could immediately meet the needs of people who are affected by COVID, by the economic downturn, et cetera. I think it's important right off the bat for me to say that although we fundraise within the Jewish community, we do write grants in the civic community, but we serve about 70% of the people that we serve, both at the JCC and Hooverwood and Jewish Family Service, are actually not members of the Jewish community. They're members of our global community, but we don't ask people who want to be members of the J or need nursing home help or need food, you know, support from our food pantry, et cetera, whether they are Jewish or not. If they come to us and they need assistance, we serve them, and we very much thank United Way for our first ever grant from the SURF Fund this year, and they are doing specifically helping us to meet more people in the neighborhood where we live and in the zip codes that we serve. So that's wonderful. That's my little intro.
Fantastic, thank you. Pam, did you have anything you'd like to say?
Sure. So I also would like to say thank you for allowing the space for CICF to have a voice in this conversation. So I would say CICF is a 103-year-old organization and community foundation. You know, what we do is what's most known anyway, is do grant making, but also engage donors in philanthropy. But one of the other things that we also do that some community foundations do is we also, for the last, I think 13 years, have had leadership initiatives. And so when we looked at, in 2017, our strategic plan was ending. And when we began the process of deciding what would we now focus on, we started to look at the data of what was happening in our community and decided that we needed to dig deeper, that we needed to figure out how we were actually addressing the data as it relates to the gap growing between those that have and those that do not. And what role did we play as a foundation? So as we started to dig into that process, which when we talk about it, we make it sound like it happened real quickly, but it took a lot to get there. But overall, we landed in a place of, after, even though being over 100 years old, we changed our mission. And we changed our mission to be much more clear about the values that we have and where we wanted to start to focus our efforts for several generations. And so we are focusing on creating an equitable Central Indiana where everyone has an opportunity to thrive regardless of race, place, or identity. And so as we worked on our new leadership initiatives, when we looked at our strategic plan, one of the things that happened out of that is just looking at the time that it takes to do the real work. So even though our strategic plan ended at the end of 2017, the world did not fall apart when we finally announced it in April of 2019. So a part of that also was because, to go with what you're saying, also, Marcy, that makes all of that most relevant is where we are right now. So one of the hard things also that we had to look at is a very bold and courageous conversation about race, and how much does race play into the things that we have been addressing, and not just through programs, but through systems. And so what happened with COVID-19, after again taking from April of last year to March of this year, is a lot of relationship building took place. A lot of really digging into what is it going to take for us to, first of all, build a culture around being anti-racist. And so all of the things that went with that, from education sessions to internally, to very, very bold conversations that we still have right now, are still struggling through, but understood that for this work to really manifest externally, we needed to take care of things internally. So we continue to do that work. But one of the things that we found when it came time to be responsive to COVID-19, we were in a place to not be, it wasn't necessarily a pivot as it relates to direction and intentionality around the work that we were doing, but it was like game on right now. Okay, so you need to go ahead and go. So some of that being, we had the pleasure of being a part of the CSR fund that Sarah led, and absolutely that was an amazing feat. There was many times I would say to Sarah, like, man, you are really awesome, because I don't know how you're managing all this. But we were happy to be a part of a larger collaborative to address immediate needs in the community. At the same time, we also then put together a fund, a CICF fund, the Neighbor Relief Fund, that gave us some opportunities to get closer to grassroots organizations, along with the work that we were also doing with CSRF. But a lot of it was focused on who are some of these organizations that we have not typically had a relationship with, we have not funded, some of them needing even fiscal agents. So I say from that, we learned the value of our ambassadors and how important it really is to have resident engagement in the work. And so that grant making process included the ambassadors along with our grants officers. So it was a matter of shared power and understanding between institution and residents about how do you actually make the investments that are going to be most meaningful to the community. And then, of course, with the murder of George Floyd, then, the heartbreak in that, let alone, just the pain of that in our community, in our organization, and pushing us further to have even deeper conversations about white privilege, about policing, about power. And so we definitely have learned a lot in the past 3 to 5 years that we've been on the journey, but definitely in the past year, we've had to dig much deeper.
Thank you so much, Pam. I can't wait to keep talking to you about this.
I had to tell myself.
It's very interesting, the work that CICF is doing. And I remember, no, I will not do that. I will not do that. It's so interesting, the work that you're doing. I remember when CICF pivoted in that direction, and it's awesome. And it's really exciting to hear about the things that are happening. Tiara, would you like to go next?
Sure, I'm busy over here also, just like, yes, Pam, yeah! It's great, and I'm so glad they have an amazing leader like you in charge of this. Okay, whenever I get into a conversation, now as a PhD student, I'm 4 years in, this is my life. There is nothing else. So when I'm speaking with people, they usually begin with what exactly is philanthropy. And so I like to think of it as kind of 3 things that are all the same thing, but different all the same. And so one is the idea of philanthropy. 2 is the action of philanthropy or philanthropic action, and 3 is the study of philanthropy. Now, the IU Lilly Family School of Philanthropy addresses all 3 of these with a focus on the institutionalization of rigorous academic study of philanthropy. Since the center was founded in 1986, later it's turned into a school, but we've been around for a little while. I've had the amazing opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with some of the most notable philanthropists of our time, as well as to be taught and mentored by founding scholars of the discipline. The school is the envy of the world. We're the only one in the US, and with the laser focus on philanthropy. It's really hard to find anywhere else, and a lot of people are surprised to find that we have that here at IUPUI, but we do. And you'd be amazed at who comes through to get some important information from our scholars. As with many other institutions, COVID-19 and the enhanced platform of Black Lives Matter in response to the murder of George Floyd has exposed some holes, has exposed some gaps. But as a new discipline, we've had the amazing opportunity to think about this stuff before and to now really make the moves and take the swift action that's necessary to include more voices into the research we do and ensure that we're doing accurate research that takes into consideration the fact that philanthropy isn't a second thought. Philanthropy isn't something that just happens, and it's also not something magical. It's a pretty simple act. And it is, of course, all those other things, but most importantly, I like to focus on the action, and that's probably what I'll be focusing on today. I hope my research on the social responsibility of Black entrepreneurs in the African diaspora will help to bridge some of the gaps in the data and further entrench philanthropy and social responsibility into mainstream university education. But through our 2 centers that focus on underserved populations or less represented populations, the Women's Philanthropy Institute and the Mays Family Center Institute on Diverse Philanthropy. Sorry, you know, I'm awful with names. We have been making strides for a while, and we have some amazing data that's come out of those 2 centers, but also our school puts out Giving USA every year. So we like to do the research. It's really great to speak to the world and speak to people about how philanthropy impacts their life and what needs to be done. But more importantly, we are charging ahead and making sure future generations have this knowledge at hand. I also teach in the fundraising school, where even though we have fundraising professionals that come to us to learn, you know, the best tips and tricks and all that kind of stuff, it's amazing to find out how many of them wish they knew what they were being taught earlier. So we can incorporate all of this into our daily lives, no matter what we're doing. So thank you so much for having me and the amazing work that everyone here does.
Oh, thank you for joining us. And before we move on to Sarah, I just want to put an APB out to the general public who's listening to this fantastic conversation. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box on the side, and we'll hope to address them before the end of this conversation. Sarah, you're up.
Terrific. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be a part of such a group of women as these who are doing amazing work here in Indianapolis. So thank you for allowing for this platform and for this conversation. And I look forward to learning alongside all of our participants who are listening in. So I'm the Chief Impact Officer at United Way. At United Way, we fight for the health, education, basic needs of all our community, and we do that through a strategy that's really kind of focused on 3 major areas of emphasis. One is the safety net support, so making sure that those that are have hit a moment of crisis, or who because of other circumstances need a sense of support to be able to meet their basic needs and to be able to survive, making sure that we're investing in those. We also are investing deeply in family opportunity work, which is looking at children and the adults in their lives, so their caregivers, their parents, their aunties, to be able to invest in them to reach their fullest potential. And so moving out of poverty, removing barriers to be able to reach their next best set of steps. And then finally, the third leading strategy is around social innovation. So often in the human service sector, we are working hard, and it's, you know, the trying to get to that next family or to that next person in need, head down, you know, shoestring budget, and there's not a lot of space and time and dollars to really focus on fostering innovation and new ideas and investing in things that are really working. And so we are creating more spaces, trying to bring more technology and more innovation lens to the human service work. So we do that in partnership with donors across our community through our fundraising efforts. You know, some people know of United Way because they know of the fundraising that we do, and some people know of United Way because they know of the services, and hopefully most people know us because we do both of those things, and that's our role, is to bring those things together, right? The donors and our community assets, and to really be able to bridge that gap. When we think about what's been happening in our community, I was heard a national speaker recently talk about our current environment, and he talked about it in terms of, really, there's three pandemics, right? There's COVID-19, and then there's the economic crisis, and then there's the racial injustice, and all of those things have created this perfect storm of immense challenge, but also immense opportunity in terms of being able to create a new and better next step for our community members. Because for those of us who have been engaged in philanthropy for a long time, we know that what we're seeing in our neighborhoods and in our communities is not newly created by any one of these three things, right? We know that there have been people struggling to get by, struggling to make ends meet pre-COVID. That has exacerbated the issue, and it's made it come to light for people who maybe did not know about it as much before, but it has existed, and in fact, the disparities have been getting greater in recent history, and particularly. So one of the things that United Way looks at, and someone had mentioned this earlier, around, we talk about the ALICE population, and that's an acronym. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Yet Employed. So it's people who are working and are doing their best to provide for themselves and their family, but may just be kind of one crisis, one healthcare bill, or one car breakdown away from living in poverty and really being in strife. And so, now, those families that are living in poverty or that are in ALICE, in that category, we have seen, even in great economic times, that's been increasing. The people who find themselves in that category has been increasing, and the disparity between those that are white that fall into those categories and those that are African American and Latino, especially, it's been going down in the white population. It's been going up in the Black and Latino population. So, just talking about it increasing is important for people to know, but it's also really important for people to know that that's not the whole story. The greater story, when you go a layer deeper, is that there is this inequity that has been in existence for hundreds of years, and this moment is being brought to light, and it's really important for us to be thinking about, talking about, learning about, enacting to change. So I found that really powerful in that greater discussion of how all those things come together. In terms of what United Way has been doing in this moment, the question of how are we pivoting, one of the things, and was mentioned in the brief introduction, was the CSER fund, and I wanted to talk about that, but to start with the collaboration and the enormous layers of support that went into this across our community. So the fund itself, it has this enormous name, the Central Indiana COVID-19 Community Economic Relief Fund, it was established by founding partners that included the Lilly Endowment, CICF. Pam was a part of that, was a great part of that work and a partner for me many times along the way. Eli Lilly and Company Foundation, Nina Mason Pulliam Trust, Richard Fairbanks Foundation, and United Way. And those were that was the philanthropy that came together, and coming together in that moment, just the first week after the COVID was confirmed here in Indiana, was a tremendous reflection of our community and what we're able to do together. And then that over time, so many more corporations and individuals and, sometimes we think of philanthropy as being the person of extreme wealth, and it obviously is that, and those individuals are so important. But it's also the person that works at UPS that gives $5 out of their paycheck every time to be able to engage in their own philanthropy and make a difference in their community. And we had everything in between on CSURF, which it was in a moment of really great challenge. There's a lot of hope that lived in that work. So as was mentioned, so the philanthropy came together around the CSURF. I was the lead staff on getting the grant making out the door, but absolutely couldn't have done that without Pam and others that were sitting around the table. And it's one of the things I love best about Indianapolis is the way that we're able to do that, the way that we the way that we come together. So that was one piece of that. To inform that work, we also did a lot of listening, bringing together other nonprofits around the community on a regular basis, started off weekly and then bi-weekly to just talk about what was happening in our community. What were they seeing in their clients and their neighbors? What challenges as organizations were they facing, because COVID and going remote and not being able to be in person to deliver services was something brand new to a lot of organizations and brand new to our community. So did a lot of shared problem solving, a lot of peer learning from each other, and some advocacy and activism to be able to do that problem solving together, which was really powerful, and again gets at that layer of collaboration that has come forward in all of this. So, within the COVID-19 piece of it, there has been those elements of pivot. As part of the economic crisis, CSURF obviously was also getting at those pieces. There's also been a lot of work by community partners around how do we get a rapid response around employment, and how do we get the word out about unemployment insurance and just being able to work through those systems. And so really being thoughtful and intentional about connecting people to existing resources and working with partners to think about what comes next. So as we're doing the work now, how can we be planning for how to make it better in the future? And I'd say then, just in closing around the racial equity conversation and action in our community, it's been something that we have been working on for a number of years, but really more specifically over the last year of having internal conversations. I think Pam talked about this, when CICF made the announcement, people were like, oh, that's great. And you're like, well, we've been working on this for 3 years. It takes a long time to be able to have the really deep, heart-changing conversations and work to get to that point. And so we've been diving deeply as a staff and as a team and as a board in those conversations at United Way, have been layering that into our grant making in terms of how we make the decisions and what sort of data we collect so that we can see if then the outcomes are meeting what our intention was. And looking at how we can do more of that in other work that we do in the advocacy and public policy realm, in data and research, and in some initiatives in programmatic work. So we have been doing that hard work, but also know there's so much more to be done, and are engaging actively in that right now. So so many of those pieces come together, and we are all called upon to do what we can and then do more.
Right. So there's there's been a couple questions in the Q&A box, and again, feel free if folks have additional questions to type them into the Q&A box. Really about giving trends. I know that many of your organizations, in addition to grant making, are also fundraising operations. How have you seen changes in individual giving as throughout the course of the last several months, and how has it, I guess, impacted philanthropy with respect to current events, or if you have seen those?
Well, I'll jump in. I think the philanthropists that we work most closely with in Indianapolis are also the philanthropists that United Way and CICF work most closely with. Our donor base is very generous in the Jewish community, and also know that if we don't have a strong Indianapolis and a strong civic community, that we won't have a Jewish community here in Indianapolis at all. And so they balance that really well. I think one of the things that we are seeing, hearing from the philanthropists in the Jewish community is how much they want to see us partnering and collaborating, looking at the landscape of the people that we're serving, and also the community the neighborhood, the zip codes that we're living in, and to work closely in partnership, so that we're not we're not making decisions about where we live and the people that we're serving in a vacuum, but that we're doing it collaboratively with other organizations that are trying to meet those same needs. I have my MSW, and I remember the course where I realized all of the different players in the social work field, in the social welfare field, that any one family may have contact with. And how incredibly important it is for us to be communicating with each other, and to be communicating with our philanthropists that we're communicating with each other. I think that our philanthropists have been, they've been flexible, they've been responsive, they've been agile, they've looked at what the needs are, and they've helped us to be able to immediately respond. About a week after the first COVID case here in Indianapolis, we put together a community relief fund, raised somewhere around $850,000. The majority of it is going to help our social service needs, which we've seen increase. Our food pantry has increased its need by 53% just in the last couple of months. We're really worried about the long-term effects of the pandemic on isolation for our seniors. We're worried about our Holocaust survivors who are, living out the ends of their lives, completely isolated from their family and their friends. And so we're trying, that's another big piece of the pivot, is how do we make sure that we can take care of those that are most vulnerable, in our community. We're worried about rent subsidies for community members, and we're worried about mortgage payments on, for people who are that, what did you call it, Sarah? Alice? I loved that. And that is a big concern of our Jewish Family Service, especially as we move into the school year and all of the expenses that kind of come with the fall and moving forward. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I'll let my colleagues jump in.
It does. Are there others that would like to respond?
Sure, I can jump in. In terms of the donors adjusting their giving and their their responsiveness, what we have been hearing from donors, individuals and foundations and corporations, has been fairly similar, which is the need is urgent, and we want to give to those urgent needs. So help us figure out a way to connect, right? Connect our passion, which may look different for different people, but then how do we connect my passion in housing with COVID relief, or my passion with food with COVID relief, or my passion with education and the racial injustice that we're seeing in our community, right? So again and again, COVID and racial injustice keep coming up, and with COVID as the economic piece too, right? So as those two things are ever present for people, how do I connect my philanthropy passion with what I see as urgent need right now? And so that has been part of our role, is helping them make those connections and do it in a timely way so that it's, you know, it's getting to urgent needs that are happening now.
If I can chime in just a little bit, probably a little bit more anecdotal, just because, you know, research takes a little time to come out, and it's bizarre when things change this quickly, to then be like, okay, our job is to tell everyone what's going on. We'll tell you in a year or so. And so we put out the Giving USA report and all these different reports. And so the data from 2017 and 2018, the report was put out in 2019, is that giving from individuals was down 1.1% from 2017 in 2018. However, giving by corporations was up by 5.4% from 2017 to 2018, according to the 2019 Giving USA report. Now you think about those numbers and think about what's going on right now. And you're like, you know, if it comes down to hoping individuals pick up, will that really happen? Who knows? But giving by bequest might go up a little bit, which is kind of morbid to think about. But you know, these are things we have to consider, and things we'll be looking at closely in the coming years. We do have two major ongoing projects at the school, one headed by Dr. Lori Polberg and one headed by Dr. Pamela Vipking. And I'm going to go ahead and drop the link for that page into the chat, just so everyone can have access to it. But on a personal level, being a student in Indianapolis, where all of a sudden my income was gone in overnight. The income I had planned for the next 5 months was just gone. And I found myself feeling a little bit useless. And so I went to the Urban League, where I usually go to give, and found support there. But the response has been completely overwhelming in terms of what people are doing in response to COVID, what businesses are coming together and what they're doing. I hope they count it. In all the hustle and bustle, I feel like a lot of us have done things that should count as philanthropy, that we don't always consider philanthropy, and so it's not counted. And so encourage whoever you know, including yourself, write it down, send an email to someone so that we can know it's happening. Also, those amazing questions came from my favorite, Angie Pachter. She worked at the school for a very long time and has so kindly reminded me that the Women's Philanthropy Institute has a new report coming out on September 1st about giving in the early months of COVID-19 that's relevant to this conversation. And so I'm going to drop the address for our COVID research on there right now, and I'm sure the Women's Philanthropy Institute report will be on there as well. And that's just my little, oh, also I work at the MLK Center in Indianapolis, and so I've had kind of an on-the-ground look at where money is coming from, how money is coming down, and how it's being directly distributed to residents and citizens. And I honestly have to say that the amount of money that has been mobilized and the way our nonprofits in the city have stood firm, worked extra hours, and really made sure that people are benefiting from the generosity of others is unparalleled. The MLK Center is doing such an amazing job. And I just encourage everyone, once again, to just make sure you count what you're doing and share what you're doing with others.
Pam, did you have any comment on this? Or I can move on to another question. Your call.
You say no and then you talk. So that's what I'm like, no, but so I just want to, you know, something that Sarah said is also very much what we're doing in that, but it was already a part of what we needed to be doing, and as far as change in mission as it relates to connecting donor passions and focus with equity work. And so we are, I would just say COVID has given us that opportunity to because it's so relevant, and racial injustice. And so when you're talking about this last year, it's kind of like, yeah, it's out there, it's kind of, yeah, we know, but at the same time, there wasn't something that's right in your lap to say, now this is why it's also very important. You know, this was here before, like Sarah said, but right now it's very much what we're facing. So when you think about kids who are not in school, and we already had such a high achievement gap between white students and students of color, and then now you think about what COVID has done to that. If you're a donor who's very much passionate about education, let's start to target some of what you're doing so that you can have some intentionality around your investment and how to eliminate that achievement gap. Versus, here's some of my favorite places of which I typically would put my investments, which are not wrong, but it is starting to have conversation like, are you also passionate, for us anyway, are you also passionate about equity? Because we are also, it's not just racial equity, it's just the systems are inequitable, you know? So if you are in any kind of way passionate about any of the systems, or programs within the systems, how can we help you to understand in a deeper level what that means? And then finally, like when we did an analysis from last year, I forget what year we're in, so 2019, April of 2019 to current, some point here current, we found that our giving doubled, and that probably is no surprise. We went from like 7 million and within a 5-month period to 13.5 million. So donors were responsive, but when you also look at that, then it also helps you to learn, like, okay, and how can we look at what did they give to, and if they can give then now, then how can we continue to get them to give? So
Right. So I have another question. So a lot of what I'm hearing is that a lot of our philanthropic sector has been put in this position where they have to respond to these immediate needs, right? Because we have a lot going on right now that we have to address right now. But if you look to the future and you think about kind of the long-term impact of all of that has been happening in our community around the world, for better or worse, like, how do you think current events are going to impact, I guess, philanthropy or nonprofit sector? Do you think it's going to have a sustaining change, for better or worse? What surprised you or inspired you about the response from the philanthropic sector, and kind of how you see the future being impacted by current events?
I'll jump in here. I promise that I'm going to be intentional about
Yeah, you're
short.
great. You're great, Pam. I love hearing you talk.
I thank you, Marcy, but I see we're running out of time, so I don't want to. But I think in this particular question, it's about foundations and funders being nimble and being willing to adjust not just our culture, but the way that we look at funding, the way that we look at support, and not doing it from a deficit-based, but also from an asset-based. And so how do you, I think that I'm hopeful that funders, so whether it's foundations or individual donors, start to look at the narrative that we have been using when it comes to being philanthropic, and that use this time to learn as well as to act, but know the difference and understand that that money brings power, and money also makes you think you know a lot, And so there are certain things that we just don't know as it relates to the communities that we support. And so I hope that my hope is that, again, just like with donors, that we start to look at much more intentionality behind investments, and that we never forget that relationships are so important. So relationships to donors, relationship to partners, relationship to all of you, ladies that are, how much more we can do when there's actual relationship versus transactions, and that we have donors move from transactions, and that we move from transactions.
That was so beautifully said, Pam. You really could, you could just wrap it up right there, because that I think was just right on the nose. I think the other piece of that is that this time where we are all trying to balance the needs of our donors and what Sarah was talking about, and how do we join people's passions And also we're taking a real look at our institutions also across the board. And, things that we've been doing forever, that maybe it's just time to stop doing them, and let's be innovative, and let's think about exactly what Pam said of how we can be more intentional about how we make change, and how we make sure that we're ensuring impact and meeting the needs of the people who need it most, but also how we can meet the needs of those people who just want to feel a part of community. So I really do believe that what we are living through right now is going to, we will see transformation in all three of the areas that we've talked about, all for the good and for many, many years, to come.
One of the things that, as we think about what will be long-term changes, I think one aspect of that is the way that nonprofits and those who are doing the hard work at the grassroots level and in our community day to day, they are changing the way that they're doing the work. And it's been hard and complicated, but I think there's going to be some changes that come out of this that might never go back. And I think we're going to see that in every sector. I think, in the private sector, we're going to see that happening, and in the public sector too. But it's, it's hard to find silver linings in things like pandemics. But there is also innovation that comes from strain and challenge, right? And so I think that we will see that. The other piece that I would say is that I think it is easy. Well, nothing's easy, but there is a trap to get caught in the here and now. There are so many challenges right now, and it's inundating us in philanthropy and in the nonprofits, and to be focused on how do I get that next food box or that next support service. But we also really need to be focusing on 6 months, 12 months, 2 years from now, because this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we need to be rebuilding better, or else we are going to be where we were before, which was inequitable and is not where we want to be as a community. And so I think that it's a challenge for all of us, and something I try to remind myself and my team of often is that, yes, we need to do the here and now, but also what are our 5 steps ahead, because our community deserves us to be strategic and not just reactive.
Beautifully said.
Very much so. Tiara, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just that, now is the time for philanthropy to drive change. Our role as individual philanthropists, because we are all philanthropists, is to advocate and hold these philanthropic institutions accountable for creating the change we want to see. Governments move slowly, and money doesn't always listen. But as normal folks, we can make sure that businesses, foundations, high net worth people, and also each other, make sure that we are really demanding the change we want to see, and not being afraid of that. There is no more room for fear, and I don't know that there ever was, but I think a lot of people were okay with the slow pace of change, and it's simply not acceptable anymore. And so despite everyone assuming that philanthropy is good and looking at it with these rose-colored glasses, we really need to be critical and push.
I agree. And it's really inspiring to hear all of you speak about this. And I feel like we all need a little bit of that right now. We really need some inspiration for the future. Things are really heavy. And so it does feel good to end on this notion of this is a really rough time right now, but there's a lot of good things happening that are going to pave the way for a more positive future. And I think the work that you're all doing is really supporting that. So thank you. I know we only have a few minutes left. I mean, there are some questions that I didn't get a chance to address through this conversation, but we will reply after the webinar is over with. But Lindsay, is this a good stopping point? Are you there?
Oh,
There
I
you
just
are.
I just need to start my video. Like, where am I? What an amazing panel. That could easily, the conversation could easily last another hour. I know the work is 24 hours a day isn't enough to do the good work that all of you do every day, not just on behalf of your organizations and the foundations and the philanthropists behind them, but on behalf of Greater Indianapolis. All of us want to see a society that is equitable, obviously, where people have the opportunity to pursue their interests and see how far they'll go. And in order to do that, people need to be, healthy and housed and educated and employed. And that creates not just better neighborhoods and communities, but a safer, more diverse, more respectful, more civil, a pluralistic society that we know is at the foundation, at the core of what this country promises. Well, we don't do it, but we promise it and we work toward it, and it's a forever challenge, and just really grateful for the leadership role that each of your organizations are playing. CICF, and I've said this to you before, Pam, the way that you leaned in, the work that had to be done before the announcement, and the commitment to the work now, and even more so with the pandemic, is inspiring to the School of Philanthropy, to United Way, to Lilly, to the Jewish Federation, and is really pushing that sort of proverbial needle in the way that we all know it needs to go. And it's just really, it's hard work, that bigger stuff that's less tangible than making sure that the pantry is stocked, which has to be done, making sure that students have access to Chromebooks so that they can learn virtually. It has to be done. The longer term, the less visible those conversations around the dinner table or Zoom boardroom table are often more difficult, and that's where a lot of the work also is taking place. So thank you all for taking some time and sharing what you do. I encourage people to follow up with all of our panelists if you have interests or concerns or thoughts, or if you want to volunteer or give, obviously. We know that, certainly the JCRC as a 501c3 could not exist and do the work of representing the Greater Indianapolis Jewish community and advocating and joining coalitions that address so many of these issues without the commitment of the Jewish community and the Federation of Greater Indianapolis to the mission of JCRC. So on behalf of the JCRC, I want to thank Marcy for moderating, Tierra, Pam, Debbie, and Sarah. It is good to see all of you, and I will look forward to being able to, breathe the same oxygen with all of you in the same room one day, hopefully soon. And to everybody who took time out of their day to join us, thank you. Please be healthy and safe, and do good work.